Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session number 2 of the Snaptrude Design Competition office hours. We'll go ahead and give people a little bit of a chance to join. If you want to, though, as you're joining in, feel free to start filling up either the Q&A or the chat with questions that we could maybe start answering for you. As far as like the structure of this goes, we try and keep this a little bit more informal, more casual environment where we can answer any questions that might be related to either design competition questions or just your overall modeling experience or how to do anything. This time and the space is essentially structured for you guys to be able to help unblock you in any ways that you need. So as far as that goes, feel free to ask any questions that you have there. We certainly don't expect everyone to want to sit on for the whole call, but if you'd like to, you're more than welcome to, obviously. But absolutely feel free to just, ask a question. And if you get your answer, we try and treat it as close to a true office hours as possible. So drop in for as long as you need, get all the information that you feel like you need. Or, if you're eating lunch and want to hang around and, see some other questions get answered or some modeling tips, you are certainly welcome to do so. So I think we've got about 16 people in here now. This is probably a good opportunity to kick off any questions. So if you'd like to, absolutely feel free to start populating the chat or the Q&A with questions. Uzma, if you could help me on here with answering some of them, if they're design related, that'd be super helpful. And then we'll sort of tag team everything.
Yes, definitely.
If we haven't had the chance to meet anywhere, excuse me, or if you haven't seen any webinars we've run before, my name is Taylor. I'm on the product team here. I also practiced architecture at Perkins and Will for about 6.5 years prior to jumping onto the architectural software side of things. So I'm familiar with a lot of architectural workflows, interoperability questions, any things like that you might have. Absolutely feel free to shoot there. So what I'm going to do is just as we get questions, I'm going to assume that we will want to see this on screen. I've been having to wrestle my Zoom lately, and I've noticed that whenever my webcam is turned off, Zoom seems to behave a lot better for me. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll turn the webcam off for this just for the modeling experience, because obviously you guys probably want to see some Snaptrude and not just me. So give me 1 second, I'll do that, and then we'll dive into some questions. Alrighty. So I've got my screen shared. I will turn this off just to make sure we don't freeze up at all. And let's start answering some questions. So I'm going to jump in the chat. Uzma, would you mind maybe having Q&A pulled up just so that we can make sure we don't miss any on either side? And we'll just start getting into some questions here. I'm going to set up just a default. We'll call this October.
Yeah. One question in the Q&A chat and one in the webinar chat.
Cool. I'm going to make a new project really quick so that we just have a canvas to start showing off some Snaptrude from. Okay. Hamza asks, for the Snaptrude tool, what type of laptop do we need in order to run it? What's the minimum requirements for power in regards to laptop? This is all browser-based, so you should have the ability to run pretty well on most laptops. Typically, it does help to have more RAM, around 16 gigs of RAM is always just a good baseline for any sort of productivity laptop, but don't want to necessarily consult on a computer. But you can actually pull up Snaptrude and run it essentially on any type of computer. There's no power requirements there either. It's because it's all based in the browser. It's meant to run essentially on anything. You'll see increased performance if you're using something that does have a little bit more RAM or a more powerful GPU just to help with rendering, but you're not going to be blocked by that.
And we have questions in the Q&A.
Okay, so Anthony asks, slime mold to allow nature to design a structure of many buildings. Anthony, maybe we could get a little bit more clarity just on the probably the model type and the geometry type that you'd be pulling in terms of like file formatting. I can show just really quick, as far as imports go, if you are able to pull that out, there's going to be less integration for actually creating that in Snaptrude because it's not typically meant as any sort of, computational design-esque tool. But on the import side of things, there are several, file formats that you can start to import here, including, Rhino and Revit through our Snaptrude Manager plugin. And then if you are able to get those, I've actually, interestingly enough, never heard of a slime mold. So you could probably, if you can get that in, an FBX or an OBJ file, that would probably be your best bet there to pull that into Snaptrude and just run a test there. If you do, and you actually get that in a model, I'd be really curious to see what that looks like just from a design standpoint and how, that translates into it. So feel free ever to jump in this message here. This chat is, while we're having, on-call office hours just to help, this chat is actually basically like 24/7 office hour because it will ping directly to me or one of the other architects on the team as well. So again, don't feel like you have to wait for office hours to ask any questions about Snaptrude or what we're doing here. You can jump in here and it'll be me or another team member, and we get back typically within a couple minutes, as long as it's during kind of normal US business hours. Anthony, feel free if you want to add any more context to help clarify your question, I can answer that. Let's see. Kenneth, if you want to reach out potentially on this chat bubble here, we could probably troubleshoot that. It's probably worth it to troubleshoot that because it individually, just to see sort of what issues you might have there that could be blocking that. There could be some things with with permissions in terms of firewalls, since it is browser based. But I would recommend jumping in this message here and just bringing up this issue that you're showing and maybe share a screenshot here, and we can get someone to sort of more directly help support that, and see if we can assist you in getting that squared away. Let's go. So let's do, looks like there's a couple here around curve shapes and then also around basics of Snaptrude. So maybe we can answer, I think I will mess up a name. Your last name is Ojo, I believe. If you could help me pronounce it, always appreciate it. But lots of questions about shapes and curves, and then also questions about actual modeling demonstration. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll do showing what it's like to use some shapes and some curves in Snaptrude as well. And then while I'm doing this, Uzma, I'll pull up a model and I'll just start modeling a couple things. Uzma, do you want to get into Arham's question about sort of basic requirements for the design challenge, and I'll start just modeling some stuff here and then talk through it? Oh, perfect. Love that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to start just modeling, just give you a quick overview of the design. This will actually be a good way to facilitate a lot of office hours, because if questions come up as I'm modeling, we can take a pit stop and start to look at that. So as far as, design mode goes and getting everything created, Hamza, the demonstration basically will have you working in essentially 3 design modes, or 4 design modes. So we have our design canvas, then we have our BIM canvas, and then we have a present mode, and then we have a program mode. I'll sequentially jump over to each of these just in like a quick demonstration to show you what they are. For a design competition like this, I typically like to start drawing in design mode and then use program, BIM, and present as ways to sort of understand and further ideate on my design concept. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll grab the line tool. You'll see a lot of this is going to function like SketchUp. One thing to note is our line tool doubles up as a way to split a space as well as draw spaces. So we'll just create a new space here. I'll create with an offset And I want to, make sure that we're able to get to all the other questions. So as, questions come in, I will be sure to answer them during this just quick overview of the basics of Snaptrude. But if we want to actually go ahead and get designing, I've got my line tool selected. I'm just going to do like a simple bar building. So we could say like a 50-foot offset here. And we could go ahead and we can start modeling this, in any sort of way that we'd like to. We'll do something like this. So as I do this, we're getting basically a default space assigned. Looks like we got a 11,000 square foot floor plate here that we want to work with. What you can do from here, obviously this is just within a 2D view. It's pretty easy to actually go from this directly into a 3D view where you're actually starting to mass out a concept. I don't have a site placed yet just because we haven't done that quite yet, but if you wanted to have a site object to draw on, you can go to any of the draw tools. Rectangle is, symbol for a building pad. If you click on site over here, we could go ahead and we could just draw our quick building pad here. One thing to note, this is, for some of the other professionals who might be on the call who are watching this, when you're designing in any sort of jurisdiction, the site area is actually what's used as the basis for the FAR calculations here. So that's just sort of helpful piece of information to know when you're calculating the FAR and setting up a target FAR. That site area is going to be pulled directly from this site object. You can override it if you'd like when you're setting those targets, but FAR requirements aren't specific to this competition, so we don't need to get super into it. But as we've drawn this, it becomes really easy to start turning this into, an overall massing concept, right? So I could come in here and I could go ahead, and if I use the control up arrow, I can start copying these spaces vertically just to get an overall massing concept in place from like a high level, right? So as I'm going through some of this, we'll be able to basically take this and start converting it into a design concept. The way that Snaptrude works is, if you are copying vertically like we have, that vertical copy logic is actually going to create an instance object type so that any changes that I make in terms of, splitting faces even is going to be reflected in all of the floor plates below that as well. If you would like to change that logic, like if we want to change the ground level here and have a little bit of differentiation, I can always right click and I can go ahead and I can click make unique. What this will do is make this object editable on its own, right? So if we want to, I'll right click, I'll isolate this and, just for very fast demos sake, we'll go through and, make this an offset on the inside. So we want to say that, we want to have pretty universally like 4-foot offset here. What this is going to do is going to create an offset space and delete this and then hide it. And now, my ground level is starting to get a little bit more activated compared to the overall design concept that we had before. Another thing, that you can do while you're in here is in these early stages of massing, let's go ahead and let's just make this slightly more interesting. We'll do one more level up. I'll make unique here. And we'll say we want to do a sort of dynamic tower concept. I always, in some of these massing models, from a design first approach, like to model in 3D just because it's the way my brain works. And I came from a Rhino background before. I'll turn on split space and let's go ahead and, whoops, I don't need to have an offset draw. Draw this, I'm gonna split this and let's just delete it. And I'm gonna do something kind of fun here. We'll copy this up and make this one unique. And essentially what I'm doing is, just creating a building concept that has, a simple podium and tower, right, with an inset on the ground level for retail. We're going to use that offset again here. And we'll say we want, 5 feet. And I'll delete this and unhide. And then let's create the sort of tower portion for this design concept, right? So as I'm doing this, I'm creating this logic here. I've got basically 2 scenarios. We've got, I think this is 17 stories, but overall, there's actually only let's see, 1, 2, 4 objects that you need to edit when you're trying to do full building edits here. So if I come in and do, the split face tool on this upper mass here, just from the middle, this is going to reflect down here. So I'm getting a lot of just, modeling optimization right off the bat and having the ability to start to essentially differentiate, upper level massing from lower level massing. And start getting things, essentially designed and in place. As I'm doing this, the overall design is I'm starting with just default spaces. One thing that you can do, and one thing that's, typically really beneficial to do, and I'm only in design mode right now, but we can look at sort of how this affects other things as well. So part of Snaptrude in terms of just high level usage is obviously about design, but it's also pairing a lot of that architectural data with the design itself. So in this case, we've got a design concept. If you're in, Rhino or Revit, to pull the data and start adding programmatic use cases, you typically need either a plugin or a computational script, or, in SketchUp, you'd be, manually tallying it, potentially pulling your hair out, right? With this, all of those instance properties are carried over to the actual properties of the model as well. So there's a couple things I could do here. I could go ahead, and if we want this to be like a mixed use project, I could click on new department, and let's just call this hotel. And let's just make it very obvious that we're going to have a bright color here. I'm going to assign this to a hotel. As I do, this entire stack is now going to be assigned as a hotel space type. We could say that this sort of intermediate space, we want to be like an amenity level or a shared amenity. So we'll go create an apartment here. Create this, we'll assign that here. And let's say we want this to be residential. I'll just do this. And again, feel free, ask any questions in the chat if you'd like as we're going through. I'll stop and answer them as we're doing this as well. And let's say residential. And we'll differentiate the color here. Say green, assign that. And then let's just do like a ground level. We could call this retail. We'll end up splitting this a little bit further just because we want to have our hotel uses and our ground level uses here. But to start, we'll say retail. And I'll assign that here. So now, essentially what we're doing here is assigning all these spaces and uses so that we can get a better idea of not just how our building looks, but what's inside of the building. If you go to, let's go to look at net internal by departments, we can now see that we have all of our departments that we've just assigned being tallied here with the associated areas along with them. So we can see, hotel, amenity, retail, residential. We can get really granular with this. We can start, from a high level massing concept and start to get a little bit deeper. But I want to show, program mode as well as, BIM and present mode just to see some of the capabilities there as far as design and, creating a full presentation goes. Kenneth, I saw that you were trying to share your screenshot. We will help you troubleshoot. If you haven't, feel free to use this chat bubble in the bottom right-hand corner. That should bring up a message. And Uzma, would you mind pinging our friend Adnan and seeing if he might be able to assist in just troubleshooting Kenneth over here and getting him unblocked as far as, just the PC goes?
Yes.
Kenneth, yeah.
I have seen your email and I've like shared it with Adnan. He should be helping you
Cool.
out like today or tomorrow. It's just that it's I think a holiday in India and here, so he should be able to help you like today or tomorrow latest.
Cool. Yeah, that should be in there. That'll just be something, it'll be, probably a lot quicker for us to just go back and forth in that chat there as well. So we'll get you taken care of on that front. But so as far as design goes, when we're in this mode, there's a couple things we can do here just to show you, where some view settings live. We can come in and we can change in a department to our view type to change from a texture mode or a monochrome mode, just sort of what your preference is. Textured mode will give you the ability in the BIM tab to start painting materials onto this. So if you would like to, start conceptualizing this in a way like really high level, almost like SketchUp, right? Where you're starting to split faces here. I won't get too deep into this because it's a rabbit hole that I could spend a lot of time modeling and styling things, but you could, use just simple colors or simple textures here. We could, go glass and we could say we want this to be a frosted blue here. So you could certainly start painting materials onto the design concept just to help, highlight either main massing areas or just, overall diagrams within the model as well. So something to just keep in mind that you can absolutely start doing. You don't just have to look at the department level view. But with that, we can go ahead and start taking a look as well as just some of the like actual data side of things, right? So We spent a lot of time in design tab. Obviously, we do have the area analysis tab on the right side. And you can take a look at, the overall areas just to tally those and get a better understanding of that. What you can also do is jump into the program tab up here. So the program tab is going to open it's essentially, think of it like Excel or Google Sheets built directly into Snaptrude. Couple ways to use this. Starting off, you can do what I've just done and you can model in your canvas. And as you model, all of those spaces become populated here into the overall design. So you can see those are being populated. You can see the areas associated with the drop downs. And there's a whole lot of other design fields that you can actually see just in terms of actual overall area summaries here. If you'd like to set, specific design targets that you're trying to design to, you can set those net targets here that you're hoping to achieve. But this is just going to become a really good place for you to actually design and have really granular data pulled into the back end. So there's, several ways to use this. I went from the design first approach, but if we wanted to, for example, come in here and actually start creating like actual spaces within this, I could even come in and, we have our default spaces assigned. What I would do now is actually convert these. There's a little trick within Snaptrude where if you want to design with both a department level, but then also have spaces embedded within this department, you can actually convert all of these objects. So you can see they just have a default label because they don't have a specific space type assigned to them. But if I was to come in here and say hotel for this is going to convert it to a type object called department. So department is going to be a different object type, but it's going to give you the ability to place objects inside it. Departments, you'll know that they're departments because by default, they will show up with like a transparent shading here. So we'll just convert these really quick. And let's say retail. So we've got all these converted to departments now. Project settings will give you the opportunity to change the opacity of these and just how they look from a design view. If you want them fully opaque again, you can absolutely do that here. Arham, I just saw your message. I think we should have a video recording, correct, Uzma?
Yes, for this we will have the recording.
Perfect. So we've got these all assigned as departments now. I'll go ahead and I'll jump into program tab and I'll show you basically just how you could, start actually space planning some of this. So we can see that we've got the names are changed here, residential, retail, amenity. So they're these department level objects. We could also go ahead and add space level objects to this tally as well. So on the hotel side, like if we wanted to just, I don't know, for whatever reason, plan from the top down, I can come in here and let's just say standard room. And we want these rooms to be, let's say 400 square feet. And for example, I don't want to have too many on the canvas because I'll be copying them and moving them around. We'll say 15 to start, and we can adjust this number later. So as I do this, I'm going to give it basically the three pieces of information you need to give program mode to create spaces for you is the label, the areas that you're hoping to achieve for those rooms, and then the overall room count. And then depending on where you're clicked on the canvas, it'll add that automatically to the department. So if we wanted to add something like a gym to the amenity, I could come in here, same deal, 1,500 square feet and quantity 1, and this is going to add that to our amenity here. As I'm building this out, there's no need to redraw or use this as a reference. It's all going to be actually pulled directly into Snaptrude. So you can actually see that I now have these blocks that I could actually begin space planning these departments out if I'd like to. So we could go ahead and we could grab these standard rooms here, and we could go ahead and let's see. Let's just take a guess at what story we want to model on. Let's just model from the 16th story. So we'll move them up to the 16th story. And then I'll go to this level here and I'll grab these and we can move these over. A couple of ways you can start using these is basically just by taking the standard rooms here and dragging them directly onto the floor plate. The nice thing about this too is as you're doing this exercise, you can lock the overall footprint area. So if you do that, you can use the edit tool, which is P, or you could just drag an edge and this will maintain that area here. So this will give you the ability to, essentially fit the spaces within your floor plate or your envelope or your department object that you're working with, so that it's going to fit a little bit better, right? And then from here, there's a couple things you can do. We've got a little bit of overlap just because we've changed all the size of these. You could just manually grab these and start blocking and stacking them on top of each other, or you could use an array and copy them using the copy tool. So what copy will do is give you the chance to copy these, and we'll just say we want 8 to start. And it's going to create this array here. As I do this, I can click back into this array and I can reduce the amount of objects as well. This is particularly helpful with parking layouts or scenarios where you have lots of rooms like this. And then we've got all these placed. If we jump into 3D view, we can now see that we're starting to space plan this floor out. The way that I typically like to work is, design the typical floor and then copy that down to the floors below. So because we're operating on spaces right now, it's not going to be changing the department object at all here. So we can jump back into this plan here, and we could go ahead and, we could say standard room, and we could call this like, let's make sure we're not going to split this space. Let's just make like a suite here. So I'll close that. I'll call this suite, and we'll add this to the hotel department here. So I'm basically, really quickly going from a really high level design into actually planning that design itself and making it just a little more usable. I can use, the line tool along with like an offset tool to create, circulation or corridor here. And, even starting to draw just building core and things like that. So definitely several ways you can go ahead and use this. And let's go ahead and split this to create our circulation a little bit better. Delete that. And this circulation will be assigned to hotel. We'll call this circulation. So that's really quick high-level overview of essentially, how you can start going from, design to an overall, space planning concept. While I do this, are there any questions that you guys have just on this process at all? As you're taking this and sort of starting to design your own project, also want to make sure that it's not just me hogging up the airwaves for the entire duration of the call, and make sure that I can get to any specific questions you guys have. If not, I could go ahead and I can show you basically what it's like to use BIM mode, where I like to use BIM mode most of the time, and then looking at present mode and how you can actually start to create the sheets to get these documents all put together. So we can hang for a sec.
Yes.
Oh,
If
yeah,
anyone
sorry.
also wants to share your screen and show us your project and actually get like help or feedback on your project, just put it in the chat and I will make you a panelist so you'll be able to share your screen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, so Anthony, I see your question in here. Let's see. So how to transfer that geometry into Snaptrude? Yeah, I think that you'd be best experimenting with the import option there. We do also want, just for clarity, as far as like the design competition and rating guidelines go, want there to be, a significant portion of the project that is designed within Snaptrude as well. So as far as like non-straight lines go, we can jump back to our ground level here. We have an arc tool. We don't support double curved surfaces from a geometry creation standpoint just yet. So there's that just as a consideration, just in terms of geometry creation. You're not going to see a lot of that, really parametric geometry that you might see, in Rhino, where with double curved surfaces or anything along those lines. But as far as like simple arcs go, you can use the same tool, so the arc tool or circle tool even, and then drawing with either offsets. I don't know. I like drawing with offsets just because I feel like I can make a whole building in 2 seconds. But there's several ways to use the arc tool, right? So we could come in here and we could say we could use this as an offset, or we could turn the offset off and start to create more custom shapes here. So couple ways to go ahead and use that. You can also switch between arc and line tool as you're drawing. So if you wanted to, for whatever reason, have like a blend of arcs and more orthogonal shapes, you could go ahead and do that. Arc tool can also be used if you have the split space selected. You can also use this to actually split objects as well. So if you'd like to get, more, detailed with your massing or your sculpting, or create, a corridor through something, you could do something like this with the arc tool where you start to, split the spaces there, or even use offset arc to split the space. So we could do, like 10 feet. And we could do the same thing. Could be, really helpful for landscaping, design concepts, anything like that, right? And now we're starting to be able to carve these shapes up using that arc tool. We could even come into our overall tower massing and apply the same logic here. We've already on that upper level planned, these units over here, but maybe in the design concept, we want to actually trim this corner out so that, we've got a little bit more of an interesting mass. So we could come in and we could use this arc almost as like a fillet tool. We'll do something like that, split that there. And we can do something like this. And then we can start to delete this and remove it. This will be, we'll see these on every level here. So we'll just select them all really quick since we're trimming it kind of after the fact. But definitely a tool that you have. So that's kind of my favorite way to use arcs, I would say, just speaking personally about using the tool for a long time, is actually, designing the shapes orthogonally and then coming in and actually, chamfering, filleting, carving things up sort of as needed to kind of push the design concept a little bit forward. And, I've got these default objects here. They look sort of silly right now. So if I wanted to, if I'm trying to come in and start planning this, for example, I'm not going to change them much, but I could go ahead and I could actually use one of our smart labels here. So there's a guide that has all of our smart labels as well, but I could just say plaza. What this is going to do is it's going to automatically reduce the height of these so that it essentially helps me to start creating, any sort of landscaping concepts or anything along those lines. So kind of inverse space planned here, but as a really quick method, that's going to be helpful for you. From here, I typically like to start visualizing things early just because I'm an impatient designer and I like to see the potential in what I'm making. So that's where I think, Snaptrude and some of our AI inspirations really do shine, and where they will probably save you guys a lot of time within the actual design competition outputs. So what we can do is, for the next steps, we'll jump into just present mode and looking at, okay, what does it look like to actually start visualizing this and creating, images from it. I'm going to go and create a new 3D view here. We'll just do like from the ground level. It doesn't have a whole lot of context, but maybe we'll go add that in really quick. So I'll save this 3D view. And I actually think that as far as textures go, I actually want to just give it a more simple texture here. And let's go materials and paint this face here. So that's looking good as far as, just simple view. I'm going to go ahead, update this view and save it. And then I can go into present mode and I'm going to have access to this view for any sort of geometry creation, or excuse me, view creation or rendering. So once you jump into present mode, if you're unfamiliar with it, or if you haven't had the chance to explore it at all, this is you can think of it like Miro or Figma, FigJam, any of these sort of open canvas tools. It's going to function very similar to that. Big difference is that this is going to have that direct integration with Snaptrude. So right off the bat, it'll start creating just simple auto diagrams representing some of the spaces so that you can get better insights just into, scale and proportions of the actual spaces there. Really helpful for those like early stage workflows. But the most powerful thing about this is just having all of the views saved directly in the sidebar here and accessible for you. So you don't have to, save them out or drag them into a sheet or anything. So if we wanted to, I could go ahead, I'll create a new sheet. It's going to be pulled in right here. And let's just turn margins off just so it looks clean. And now I can start dragging views and floor plans in, right? So I could pull this view in. I've got access to that. I'll just double click here and we can go ahead and start essentially manipulating this view, getting it placed on sheet, making it look nice. So pull this off to the side. If we want to, really quickly create a presentation sheet, I could actually go back into our views panel and I could grab any sort of floor plan. So we just space planned 16, I think it was. So I'll drag that in just so you can see what that looks like. So it's not brought in with any of the diagrammatic materials. What I'll need to do is basically go save those settings here. So, because this is in our textured mode. So I'm going to jump back to design really quick. And let's go to stories. Whoops. Plan 16. And let's change our view settings here to department. And then I will go ahead and update this view here. And then if I jump back into present mode now, I can push this update through. So we have an update button here for anyone who's sort of iterating and creating things as you go. The update button will help you with just sort of design version control, essentially. It becomes a really good way to sort of see how design has progressed. So you ultimately control when a sheet gets updated to the most current geometry or view settings. So I'll update this really quick and we'll see now we've got this. We've got the hotel label pulled in here, but you can adjust all these labels as you need. And there's a couple other things that you can do here that are, pretty helpful. So from a design standpoint, you can change the overall scale of the drawing, scaling it up or down to, whatever fits your sheet or your overall preferences. And you can also actually change the overall styling of this. So I could come in and I could choose, if I'm doing more of a space planning exercise, could choose rounded corners here to give that more diagrammatic feel of all their spaces and how they're relating. I could also change, the corner radius just depending on the size of the project, right? Like if I'm using, a 30,000 square foot floor plate, I probably want a bigger corner radius just so I can communicate that better. So you can customize that corner radius just to the best look and feel for your diagramming exercises. And then you can also do, if you're trying to validate just space adjacencies, there's a bubble diagram mode, and I'll give the disclaimer right now that this is going to look weird because it's already space planned. But you can convert all these to bubble diagrams. So this is helpful, like right when you're kicking off a project, ideally right after you, import those spaces into the design tab, as a method for you to create really quick adjacency diagrams and stacking diagrams. So now we've got, two views on the sheet. We could jump back to this view and we could, give this a prompt. The best thing about this is, this is overlapping here. The best thing about this with the prompting is it's really just up to your imagination and how you'd like to essentially ideate this. So I could say, recreate this view as an architectural, say, sketch. We'll say concept sketch. Part of this process, is obviously iteration to get like a prompt that you feel like you get predictable results that share your design in a way that you like. But the nice thing is that, this happens really, really quickly. So you can start to stylize all of these and get those prompts in and start creating, really consistent graphics of the model. One thing that is sort of like a helpful tip that I always like to do is if I get a prompt that creates an output that I like really enjoy, I will add a note here and I will copy and paste this whole prompt and I'll just save the prompt off to the side so that as I'm essentially going through my design process, I've got access to this and I could just paste it back in so that I can be really, consistent with it. The best way to use this, this is really high level, but is you kind of treat the AI as like an intern and you explain as thoroughly as you need what you want to see in the scene. And it responds really well to a lot of those prompts. So we could say, this massing concept as a mixed use building in Boston. Say add, whoops, I just made a bad typo. Add realistic materials and entourage. And you could even, like if you're a rendering junkie, you could even say include, in school, this was one of my favorite things to add, volumetric. Include volumetric lighting at sunset. we can get really specific. So this becomes, part of that ideation process where, you don't necessarily need to go design and detail out the whole building to see the potential. So this becomes a way to like simultaneously communicate the design, but also go back in and iterate a little bit better, right? So it's done a pretty interesting job of placing this within context that it had no idea it needed to be placed in, but also trying to adhere to some of the materials, right? So like I've given this, just gray coloring here. So it's interpreted this as, oh, it's just going to be, concrete facade. We could start to change this or modify it, or even say like change the gray area to, let's just see if this works. To a pattern. And let's see if we get that into an output that changes that a little bit. So you can also, we're going back to the initial prompt here that we're using. But once you actually have a design that you like, and you can see it started to take those inputs into place here. Like once you have a design that you like and you're like, oh, this is actually really close to what I want to start tweaking it. I could actually just come in and instead of recreating this whole prompt from the beginning, I could go ahead and I could just take this part of the prompt and modify this image here. So ideally, what we hope to see with the output is that it'll just change the gray areas on this building to basically another pattern. So the gray areas on so then you can start to iterate over all of these and start to really, really well isolate the areas that you'd like to modify here. I see Darren, how do we move the screen when I swipe left or right? Depending on if you're using a mouse or a trackpad, typically for any sort of 3D modeling software or boards like this, I try and always use a mouse, but you can use the middle scroll wheel will let you pan around the scene, or you can use the hand tool, which is hotkey H, and you can also pan around the scene as well. And then as we do this, we could say, I actually think I like this design concept and I want to just add this onto the sheet. We'll just add it over top so we keep that view saved. And then we can come in and we can start iterating on top of this. We're using this, the system prompt that we created for this to go ahead and save other views out. And then, you could simultaneously take this out and we'll do one of these just because we have, I think, 15 minutes left and we'll end with an output. We could say, a slow video of this. We can use Google VO here to actually turn those renderings into, really simple animations. It looks like there's a question about modeling something like the Sydney Opera House. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we're geared less towards like parametric double curved surfaces. Those are going to just require a little bit different geometry creation standards. And so I'd say, if you are trying to model like a complex roof scenario, you would probably want to use a tool that's built for those sort of modeling operations that are built around. That failed. That are built really around creating those more complex geometries. And then you could import that, into Snaptrude. I would also mention though that if you do that, just try and make sure that you do have a significant portion of the actual design done within Snaptrude, just because that's part of the actual rating requirements is to make sure that, we are getting designs that are designed primarily in Snaptrude as the submissions for this. Darren asking, how do we access the AI feature? Darren, if you would like to clarify which one in specific, I can show you that. In present mode, AI will just be active whenever you have any image on the scene. This could be an image that's generated in Snaptrude, or it could be an image that you pull in from the internet somewhere, and you want to just reprompt over that. So you can use that here, one where you type in a request. So if you'd like to kick off a project with AI, you can actually go, and I'll show you really quick. I'll create a new project and say AI kickoff. And this will give you the ability to kickstart with AI. This will give you, as far as like an output goes, it's going to give you basically all of the program spaces and the departments for you to begin blocking and stacking and creating those massing concepts with. So you'll still be responsible for creating, the overall design concept here. But you'll be able to start taking those and have the areas and your targets already set from the get-go. Melchizedek asks, are you able to use AI for interior perspectives with furniture and circulation layout? Yes, you can. If we can just go back to that previous model here. If you wanted to, start doing any of that sort of space planning, you would probably be jumping into BIM mode at that point. So if we jumped into our 3D view here, we could go to BIM mode. And let's just do a quick example of sketch to BIM and what that actually looks like. So sketch to BIM, we'll say we want the external walls to be curtain walls. And we'll just, for time's sake, do this really quick. So sketch to BIM is going to take all of this. It's going to convert it. You can see we've got those standard room walls. Looks like I forgot to change the wall type on this, but we could come in and swap those later if we wanted to. We've got this converted to, essentially what is an object that's not just a solid space object that has floor plates and walls and things like that. If you were to go in a little bit further with the overall design and start putting wall types in here, you would be able to see that a little bit better. But let's jump into like the first floor. And we've got, we're on the ground level here. We didn't draw any sort of space planning down on this level. So once you have that floor plate drawn, you could certainly come in and actually draw some walls yourself if you'd like to, just using the regular design tools in BIM mode. But for the example that we're looking at for interior perspectives, you could go into your plan, and then we have basically a whole host of furniture here. So I won't spend too much time getting into furniture layouts or anything like that. But you can start to add furniture to the scene, and essentially just creating a scene around that furniture. This furniture, just like all the actual modeling, is in 2D view as well as 3D view here, right? So we can jump back into 3D, and we could get in and a couple ways we could go about it, but really high level, we could just say save this view and go back to our present mode. And then let's just pull that view in and create an interior rendering. Of this living room. And we can see if we can try and condense it to add some more furniture for us. So Melchizedek, that would be sort of a workflow you could use to do any sort of interior renderings. One thing that, just in terms of workflow, that I always like to do, so you can see, we're starting to render this out actually pretty close to our overall geometry. So more detail you put into the model, the more detail you'll get out of the model. But this is really quick way to start getting those renderings showing in the scene for you. One thing that's just kind of a helpful tip that I would say, if you are going to be converting a model to BIM mode is most of the time best used, when you're trying to do any sort of interior layouts like we just saw, but as sort of a pre-staging area for a lot of like the Revit and Rhino import and export features. So you'll want to use this as a way to essentially pre-assign a lot of your wall types. So this step on the side becomes important because when you transfer this into Revit, in practice, if you're going from, concept to SD or, further down the line, this will give you the opportunity for these to be actual parametric objects. So all of that kind of goes back to say, this definitely represents like a jump in the model evolution where before I go into BIM mode from a massing concept that I'm happy with, will always go in and just as personal best practice, save this model so that I have a massing version of the model and then a BIM version of the model. And then if I need to make any changes, it's really easy to do that. And then as far as present mode goes, if you do have, multiple models that you're trying to share, you can copy and paste sheets from present mode into present mode. So you could easily copy and paste content to and from different models, different scenes that you have as well. 2D sections would be primarily just housed within your plans. So if you jump into, your floor plan here, you would be able to save this out in whatever view you'd like, and specify the department settings. Because we're typically used for that early stage space planning, there's not a section tool quite yet, but that is something that we will be building out as our BIM mode becomes more of a sort of holistic BIM mode as opposed to sort of the pre-Revit staging areas as well. So not going to be the 3D section tool right there. And then 2D would be primarily around just plans and saving those views out as you need. If you did want to do any sort of like 3D, planning, you could certainly come in here and you could actually select, just marquee select, use the hide tool, and then create, these sort of isometric planning views if you like. You could certainly do that. And one thing that would help you as you do that is if you save a 3D view with objects hidden, that 3D view will retain the essentially hidden properties of that. So if I was to go back to like a regular view, it's, unhiding everything, and then I toggle back to 3D view and then it's rehiding it again. Yeah, Darren, the view of the interior, you'd basically just come in and you'd just navigate camera up to that perspective. We're hoping to get that view, right? And we can unhide everything here. And then once you're in here, you can start to pan, zoom, orbit, and then save those views out. Cool. So Uzma, is there anything that I've missed as far as questions go so far? We only have just over 5 minutes left. So if anyone has last minute questions, I'm going to give an opportunity to answer those. Using wall blocks. Yeah, Darren, if you'd like to, depending on sort of the scene that you have. I always like to just hide the wall if there is a wall blocking it to create that view, and to get a little bit of a better camera angle in there. You could also go into like a position camera view here. So in the bottom right, we could go and position this camera here, and I want to say I want to look, from here to here. And as I do that, it'll help me position that camera. Is that more what you're looking for? Perfect. Yep. Yeah, that just lives in the bottom right-hand corner. Definitely helpful for those 3D views or even, external views. If the wall is blocking it, then you can select the wall and just press H if you want to hide it or zoom a little bit further. A lot of it just depends on sort of view extents in the clipping region of, your scene and where you're zoomed. A 2D surface line and cut a 3D object. You could certainly split the objects if you wanted to. It would just create, a separate mass, right? But you would be able to, go into your plan. Let's just go to plan 1 and model something over here. You could, absolutely use that as a sort of workaround if you wanted to get that type of a diagram out of your massing concept. Just grab, the line tool and, we could actually go hack this together really quick, probably. We could copy this up and we'll get these to be instance copies of each other. And then Melchizedek, like you mentioned, split the space, in theory, if we wanted to create a sort of pseudo section, we'll call it. I'll split these, and then now, I have the ability to hide that. And, that essentially becomes that internal section of the building. But, that's for one singular stack. It still is a little bit of a workaround, but if that's, what you're asking just about overall, sections. 11, you should be able to get access to Snaptrude Pro just by signing up for the design competition. Uzma, if you have any other documentation or help for how to get signed up on the competition side to have that access, she'll be able to share that with you, Levin.
It's just like just sign up to the competition from this particular link that I've shared, and you will have access to Snaptrude Pro with all the AI features, with all the pro features and the BIM mode, etc.
And Darren, to scale an object, just click the edges and adjust it. Yeah, you could use the push-pull tool with P to begin scaling that object. Or if you wanted to universally grab all the sides at once, the offset tool here will give you the opportunity to do that. There's not going to be a specific scale button here, just because all of our object types are hosted directly to the actual floor to floor levels. For furniture. Depending on the furniture that you have, there's a properties panel on the right side that'll give you some handles to adjust there as far as scaling goes. For furniture, look at my windows. I would. Is there a specific furniture type you're curious about? Within the furniture, there's several points that you can start to adjust. Oh, I see. So you're asking about the sofa. Yeah, the sofa is not going to be like a parametric object or like a Revit family. It's more of like you think of it like a fixed object, especially when it comes to sofas. If you do have preferences for models that you want to import and bring in, you could certainly bring those in as separate imports as well. Sure thing, Darren. Melchizedek, yeah, we have a competition criteria. Uzma is always the best person to ask about this because she basically wrote the book for our competition.
If you could drop in your email, I will send the material again to you.
Cool. Well, as far as that goes, yeah, we'll have this recorded. I do appreciate you all jumping on, and for those of you who hung around for the whole thing, good to have you. Excited to see overall what the outputs look like, and what some of the design proposals look like. Again, that chat button in the bottom right hand corner, that'll give you can think of that as like mini office hours. We're pretty much always accessible in US Eastern time zones during working hours. And even outside of that, we typically try and get to people as quick as possible. So feel free to reach out there if you have any questions, or if you don't want to send screenshots of your model to try and troubleshoot something, or just to get high level feedback about direction, or heck, even for like a design critique, right? Happy to do that. Other than that, do appreciate everyone joining the call and all your questions, and of course giving me the opportunity to model some Snaptrude projects in front of you guys.
Yes, and thank you so much, Taylor, for that. And we are also hosting a webinar on the 6th of October on the World Architecture Day to launch Snaptrude AI. So whatever AI features we have, we're going to launch a lot more. So please join that webinar as well. And as part of the design competition, whatever we launch, you will have access to that as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Sure. And Darren, they're on Thursdays, but that chat bubble is every day. Cool. Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone, and best of luck on the design competition. And we will potentially see you next
Just
week.
Taylor, someone has a raised hand. I will
Oh, I
just
see.
allow them to speak. Yes. Shri Gayatri, you can speak. I see you've raised a hand.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
we can.
You can ask a question.
We might be having some microphone issues.
Okay. Um, you can send us your questions to the email communications@snaptrude.com, or you can ask the question in the product chatbot itself. So yeah, I think we don't have any more questions, Taylor.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, one of our coworkers likes to call Thursdays Friday Junior. So happy Friday Junior to everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.